All right, we are here to go over some of the research and documentation that has previously been submitted along with some blacksmithing projects. I am here with Brandr Aronsson and Ragnarr blaskegg. Brandr is the guild master for the East Kingdom Blacksmithing Guild, and Ragnarr is the deputy guild master. My name is Aronsson. I am the secretary and web minister for the guild. So within research and documentation, there's two main categories that need to be covered. We have research, and then we have the methods and techniques of actually creating the item. So first, we are going to cover research. We're going to go into sort of general concepts and then present specifics from two projects. A project that Brandr had previously submitted and a project that Ragnarr previously submitted. So Ragnarr, let's start with the general research.
Okay. Hi, everyone in the future who watches this video. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research philosophy. Now, with my research philosophy, I first want to say don't get locked into here. Don't take these as being tried and true. I am, as Brandr will go into more in depth on like what he does, since he's done a lot more projects than I've done. There's still a lot of places where I am going to learn and refine this, but I really want to talk about my research philosophy of what I go through when I research a project. And let me share. So I have really distilled it down to 7 steps that I go through when I am researching a project and submitting it to a competition. And that first one is I don't try to get locked into an idea until I've done some research. Now, that may seem counterintuitive, like, oh, how am I supposed to do research? What I say is go start looking around. Like you have a general idea of that you want to work on a blacksmithing project, but don't get locked into this idea like I need to go find period swords now, and that's the only thing I'm going to look at. What I'm saying is stay flexible at the start of your project. Don't worry too much about not knowing what you want to make, just that you want to make something, and start looking at examples. Start going out to museums, start looking at things and like seeing what you can do. And that leads to the second piece, which is to be flexible about the documents that you're looking at. Don't be like, oh, I just need to look at books, or I have to go buy these really expensive documents. Because of the pandemic, museums have done a great job of really digitizing their archives. One of the great places that I find a lot of ideas for me with the 2 major projects that I've submitted is the British Museum. The British Museum has an amazing catalog for you to go searching for different tools and devices that the British Museum has cataloged over the years. And even if they're not on display, they may have photos of a lot of their backlog, which is great for us. And the next piece is always be willing to ask for help. When you're going through this, you might feel a little stuck or not sure where to go. And always feel like that you can go to either people in the guild or even people outside the guild to ask for help. Like there are so many people in the arts and sciences scene in the SCA who are willing to help and kind of point you in directions that you want to go. And those 3 are really going to be the core foundation of starting your research project. When I started my first research project, which was on the Viking lady knife that I think everyone knows, it's that knife with a little like hook on the end. Everyone was telling me I got locked into this thing, like I had to find it. And I did find like an 8th century example, but I got so locked in that like I drove myself crazy. So when I did my second research project, I was like, I kept myself open to see what can I go look for that I could find a lot of documentation for. And I found the Viking wrangle, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But then that leads to my 4th step of like looking at the rubrics of the competition that you're going for and seeing what they're looking for and using that as a guide. Once you have an idea of what you're looking for, then using the rubric to kind of start meeting as much as you can, but you don't need to feel like you have to follow it all the way through. Like, it's a good guidepost, but don't feel like you need to be like completely locked in, especially if this is like your first project. Use it to help you along your way, but don't feel like you have to hit every mark. And that leads to the next piece, which is using the rubric, learning about the period ways to make your project, but don't feel like you need to follow them for your first few projects. Like, you want to make sure that you document like how in the period they would have made the project that you're working on, but also know that like you may have certain limitations, especially for your first project. Get a piece done and then show like what the period techniques are versus the modern techniques that you may have used and why you had to use those, and then iterate on top of them. Learn how to maybe do the period things later on so that your next project you can get a little bit better, and just be willing to keep doing that. And then the last 2 points are just reminders to yourself to be willing to learn. This is all learning. This is all about learning. Yes, you're going to meet people who may be super critical, but there's always a good nugget of some kind of knowledge or feedback, even in the most critical feedback, that you can use to get better and keep going. And that just leads to my last point, which is be willing to fail and be willing to try again. Because as blacksmiths, we know we may fail a lot, but you can always try again. And that even comes with your research of trying to be willing to be flexible with yourself, be willing to learn, be willing to take some hardships along the way, and then basically rebuilding yourself to then try again and do this again. And we here at the Blacksmith Guild are always going to be willing to help you out, even if like it was a hard time. So those are my steps on my research philosophy of how I go about when I'm trying to research a project. You're muted, Arnora.
And these slides will be up on the website for the research philosophy, so you will be able to check those again and refer to them later. So now we are going to go into the specifics of the research that Brandr and Ragnarr have worked on.
What about my research philosophy?
Yeah, do you want to talk? Why don't we have Brandr talk about his research philosophy?
Or I don't count.
Do you have a research philosophy?
What, do you think I'm an idiot?
Well, you didn't present. You don't have slides ready. So
well, I didn't realize you were supposed to bring visuals to this thing.
I was actually going to ask, like, Brandr, how different are you?
No, it's fine. You know, mine's not important. I'm just the guild master. We'll move on. Let's just move on.
No, rewind.
No.
Okay. So,
Arnora, my philosophy is not important. So, we'll just move on.
And then, of course, next we'll go into the extremely important research philosophy of Brandr, the guild master and founder of the guild.
No, we won't. Thank you. I didn't realize you're supposed to bring visuals, so I don't.
No. I just threw that together. So please, just talk it through.
Ragnar's list is good, and I can expand on that. For me, having done a number of projects, I originally got like very, very pigeonholed in doing just Viking stuff because that's what I like and that's what I enjoy making. But it's important to get out of your comfort zone. So the last two A&S projects that I did were not Viking. I did a representation of a 13th century church door, the hardware on the door, for my 2 projects ago. And then my last project was, as you'll see, this 14th century candle stand. And to read what Austin said, don't be afraid to fail, because this project was an epic fail at every step. And I'll go through that. But for me, with regards to the research, I look at what I might want to make within a genre, like whether it's like lighting, whether a chandelier or a sconce, or whether it's some kind of bracket or hinge, whatever it is I want to make. And then I'll go and look for period examples of that particular item throughout, whether it's Norse or English or French or Spanish. And then once I have that idea, then I'll start looking at the particular piece. And if I can find an extant version of it, I will. I do a lot of work on the Metropolitan Museum website. They have got a lot of stuff on there, and it's all it's categorized, and you can just put in what you want to look at, and like 800 things will come up with pictures and provenance. And the candle stand that I made was actually, I mean, I went to the cloisters and looked at the actual piece, but that's on there. And so if I can find the piece, then I will go and I will look at it and I will measure it and go back 3 or 4 times and look at it and measure it. Something I'm working on right now is a hinge set that's on, it's a 15th century hinge set that's on a cabinet at the cloisters. And the more you look at it, you see the things that are interesting about it. This particular one is, it started as a hinge, and then people added onto this hinge and added decoration till it went from an X hinge to a very long hinge. So there's interesting history there. So once I get that, then I start looking at how it was made and in period, how what they probably did and how they did it. When I first started, I didn't worry about period procedures because I didn't have a coal forge. I wasn't going to have a coal forge in Brooklyn. And the first couple of things I presented, they were like, oh, is this wrought iron? I was like, no, because they didn't use wrought iron. They used mild steel. Oh, but everybody thinks it's wrought iron, particularly people who don't know what we do. Is this wrought iron? No, it's not wrought iron. Did you use a coal forge? No, I didn't use a coal forge because I live in Brooklyn and my house will go on fire.
So part of the, I guess part of the documentation is telling people actually, yes, you know, maybe you thought they used wrought iron, but in reality.
In fact, I was just going to get to that because in my documentation, my early documentation, which was miserable, and it was noted by a number of people. They were like, your work is extremely good. Your documentation is awful. So I took that to heart. I found somebody, a friend of mine, who is a Laurel, and she helped me a lot getting my documentation to a place where on the last thing I submitted, people were like, oh my God, your documentation was amazing. We love reading this. When is this project going to be done? But that was a process. The door that I did, which I felt the documentation was very good, was not good enough for the 3 people who read it, even though I felt that I had hit all the things that I was told to hit. But you can never tell with particularly judges who aren't blacksmiths, who are looking for shiny, who are looking for in-depth information, which sometimes we just don't have when it comes to blacksmith and ironwork, because a lot of it was made. We don't know who made it. It could have been a village blacksmith made something in a particular way that maybe he made that way, but nobody else did. So that's not how things were done by everybody. It was just how it was done by that guy.
Yep.
And these people don't understand that. So being a blacksmith artisan comes with it a lack of understanding from the people who are going to be judging your work. So the more information you can put into your research to explain why it was this, why it was that, when did wrought iron become steel, how did bog iron become steel with the Vikings, when we went from side bellows to the chambered bellows, which raised the heat of the forge from a mild 600 to 1800, where we could start making steel and forge welding. All those things happened in particular periods of time. So you need to put that information in for the people who don't understand, because they will ask for it. And if you don't have it, they're going to assume that you don't know your own stuff. So it's important for us as blacksmiths to educate with our documentation, not just to document, but to educate, because they don't know what we do.
Mhm.
So on my final project, which I did when I did the stand, I not only documented everything, the provenance of the piece, lots of pictures of the original, and I actually videoed my process along with pictures. It was such a difficult project; it's still not done, and every step of the way there was a failure, including I actually built a coal forge in advance to do this project. In fact, Ragnarr helped me with some of it. He was present for one of the failures. So
You were very mad.
yes, yes, I was. But so do as much research as you can in advance. Do research on the process. Make sure that the process is something that you can manage. Don't set yourself up for failure. Failure is fine, but don't start with setting yourself up for failure. Find something that you think you can make and go there. If you fail is fine, but don't pick something that is so difficult that there's no way you can get it done.
Yeah.
So,
I'll also add, like, don't hide that you use modern techniques or materials on things. Like, document that. Tell what the differences are, but like, don't try to pass something off and be like, oh, of course I used iron and not steel. Like, be upfront on a lot of this.
People
like,
are gonna,
people
are gonna, and they're gonna know. They're gonna know that they're gonna look at it and go, yeah, that's not wrought iron, because wrought iron looks a particular way, and so yeah, be upfront, list all your stuff, list your materials and your process.
Okay, thank you. So now we are going to go into the specifics for research for the two projects, Brandr's 14th century candle stand and Ragnar's Viking wrangle. I am going to present the documentation that we have. And again, this is also available on the Guild website. So you can find these and take a look.
Ooh, they're side by side.
They are side by side. Well, I didn't know who was going to show theirs, who was going to discuss theirs first, and I assumed there'd be a lot of back and forth. So let's get into research. Who wants to start?
I'll start since mine's over there.
Yep.
So the candle stand is something that actually I had been looking at for a long time and I wanted to make. But I did some smaller things. Actually, the door that I made is actually at the cloisters. It's around the corner from that stand. But it's massive. So once I decided that was what I was going to make, I went on the Metropolitan Museum Cloisters collection, found the documentation, found the provenance, and it was within the period of what we do. So that was good. For metal stuff, this is an interesting thing. If something you want to make like this or something similar to this, and it says it's 16th century or 17th century, there's a good possibility that this thing also was made earlier, because a lot of this stuff did not change in style or process in that 300 or 400 years. Metalsmithing was pretty much what it is today. Not a lot has changed. So you may find that while this particular piece is documented to, they found it in a castle in the 16th century, it may be 100 years older than that, because there's no way to sort of say that it wasn't there from the grandfather of the guy who owned that castle. So you can't say that about fiber, and you can't say that about other things, but with metalwork, these things last hundreds of years, so there's a wide gap. But anyway, this is 14th century, I believe French. So once I looked at this particular piece, I went back like 4 times with a soft tape measure, and I measured every piece of the candle stand, the arms, the feet. I got pictures from underneath of how the stand is riveted into the leg component. I mean, the central piece is riveted into the stand, how the arms were connected, how the arms were forge welded at the top. I measured everything. And I went home and started doing drawings. And that's a Chambers bellow. I actually talked about wrought iron and bellows and the heat and steel and all that stuff. I gave them a little primer on that, and they liked that. They were like, "Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for letting us know." And I gave a whole idea list of different kinds of steel, and that's on the next page. And carbon and carbon content. So again, they enjoyed that also. I actually found a website where they actually listed out the different carbon contents for different steel. So I actually copied that and I put that into my work. I believe it's down. So once I had my first set of measurements, I figured out what I needed to make it. And then I went ahead and started to build the coal forge, which took much more time than I had anticipated. So instead of getting started on this project in early September, I was still making the coal forge in early September. So I was quickly running out of time to make this project. But I went through all the steps of making the coal forge. I documented that. I think I documented that in a different thing, but there's the coal forge that I made for this. And so in this section, I talk about the different levels of fire in a coal forge, because a coal forge fire is not just a plain flame. You have a bottom section, which is your heat. You've got your middle section of the fire, which is where you work your steel, and the top section is the insulator that keeps the heat in. So I discussed that in this paragraph. And again, they were very happy about my, explaining to them things that they didn't know. Moving on. So then I also had to make tools for the coal forge, because that you need a rake, you need a can. So these are my initial drawings of the thing. And what I found out was that what I had thought was a 1/2-inch steel central post was actually a 3/4 inch steel central post, which made it much harder to work. And it made the whole project infinitely more difficult. And one of the things that happened was when I measured it originally, the way this thing is made is at the bottom of the central post, it's split, and two pieces are reversed on itself, drawn out into points and turned up. And the overall length was 65 inches. And unfortunately, I measured it to 65 inches, not taking into account the 10 inches at the bottom I needed for the spikes. So the first one I made was too short. And that was after that.
Let's go into this part later when we go into the method and techniques. Let's just
Okay.
Stick to the research.
Okay, so after doing all of that, I actually had to figure out how to make it in process. Now, this is something we talk about a lot, is process, because when you make something, whether it's a hook or a door handle, you have to make it in a particular way that will allow you to actually make it, to hold on to it, to turn it, to get it into a forge. So the process of making this was very difficult because it was very, very big, and there was a lot of moving parts on this to make this thing. So my initial doing the draw out first was wrong. The second time I did it, I turned it around, I did the split, I drew out the bottom and got that done first because I needed to be able to hold on to it. Then I flipped it around and then I drew out the top because that was a much easier process, and it made it shorter by 10 inches. So it was easier to work.
Okay, excellent. All right, so Ragnarr, do you want to talk about your research?
Sure. So going back to my design philosophy a little bit, I wasn't sure what I wanted to research. Now, what I did know, I had like a kind of like an abstract idea. I like weird history like artifacts. And so I basically went through a lot of time trying to find a weird historical artifact. Now, also my persona in the SCA is a Viking, so I I was looking into that. And I came across my first source there, which was this iron wrangle from the 9th, 10th century on the British Museum. And I started looking into that and trying to find other examples of a wrangle, where I then started to really go down this rabbit hole of
Wrangle hole.
wrangle hole is a wrangle hole of different wrangles that I could find. I actually ended up calling the University of Oslo and talking to someone there about a wrangle. You can see like I have a few links there of wrangles that I got, and they gave me a book source, which is my fourth one, from this person who did research in the 70s about the wrangles. What she was doing was she was doing a bunch of research on Scandinavian mounds, so like death mounds and funeral rites and everything. And part of her research was these weird devices that they found there, and it just started pigeonholing I mean not pigeonholing, snowballing at that point. So like I started finding all her documentation and other people who were talking about it, and then I found her going through her stuff. I found because like this is what happens when you go through your research. When you start reading someone else's research, you start seeing what their documentation is, and then going to their original sources. So I found like this Danish person in 6, who thankfully someone translated this from Danish into English, and I found their works where they actually started talking about the wrangle, and really going through and like learning about it, because I started reading and going through all this other stuff and finding out that it basically was a device to attach to sleighs that because of how the Vikings viewed horses, because Vikings, from what I found out, Vikings didn't really use horses for war. They used them more as transportation, and for a lot of religious rites, it becomes like a religious object at that point, because it starts getting integrated into some ceremonies and whatnot. And it just snowballed from there. Like I started really reading all of that, which really like that's where the fun in the research is. When you go out and you're not sure what you're going to find, and you find something really cool, and you found other people who have researched this, and then going through that all was one of the most joyous parts of this, and one of my favorite parts of this. The 2 projects I'm kind of working on now concurrently is I'm looking at Viking medicine women, or witches, depending on how you want to look at it, their magical implementations, and I kind of want to remake that, because the Vikings, as opposed to some of the other cultures, their mystics used metal objects and for their magical rituals, as opposed to other groups like the Druids or the Celts, who used a lot of wooden objects. And so I kind of want to recreate some of that. And then the other thing I'm looking into is chess pieces and chess boards, which is distinctly not Viking, because I don't want to be locked into just Viking stuff. I want to be able to look at other things, and finding cool stuff that people in history have made out of chessboards. So looking at all that. The next piece I really want to talk about, if you go down, Arnora, is really documenting down a little bit further. Here, the build, really documenting your build, and you can see really highlighting why you use certain materials instead of the ones that you went. I mean, Brandr's a lot further on this of building like a cold forge and really going period, whereas I'm still at the process of I'm going to be using steel instead of iron, at least for the next couple of years. I may feel differently in a little while about wanting to go more into iron. Although for the chess set, I am doing a lot more pewter and copper work, and trying to branch out into other metals that are more period. And then I only have a propane forge. I think the cold forge, I need a lot more experience before I feel comfortable with the cold forge, especially living in Brooklyn, because I know Brandr, you did it, but I'm still a little scared about it. So, you know, really documenting why I'm making those differences. I even talked about the wood that I use, because my wrangle, I attached it. The one that I built is more of a used for religious ceremonies. At least that's what I tried to recreate. And I even talked about the wood. I used wood from a European tree that would not have been around until the 17th century. So the Vikings would not have used this wood, but like I talk about why I use that versus this. The piece of wood that I got was from a tree that fell down during a storm, and I was like, all right, I feel like I have to use this now. I even wrote there that it was a sign from a god, so I should use it in my wrangle. So yeah, I sometimes you get inspired and you really want to use a piece and get it into your project, but it may not be period, but documenting the reason why is going to be key. During this, people appreciated, like, I could have gone out to go get a period piece of wood, but they really appreciated that I wanted to use something that like really meant something to me to be a piece of this project. Because like you're really putting a piece of yourself, you're putting your time and your effort into these projects, like as opposed to the other arts and sciences. Like we are one of the like most physically active and difficult, I feel like. I mean, that may be hubris on my part, but like
no, it's true. It's absolutely true.
We are in a physically demanding piece. So you're putting your entire body, effort, sweat, and blood into something, and so you want to feel like a piece of yourself is in this.
And I'll on top of that is that the people who are judging you have no concept about what it takes to make something. Just in the comments, well, couldn't you do this? Well, I could have done that, but that would have been stupid. Because that's not how things were done. Go by the way things used to be done, then you can see why, at least with blacksmithing, the old ways are absolutely the best ways because they figured it out and it works. You know, yes, new techniques are good, new tools are good, but really it's a hammer, it's tongs, it's fire, and an anvil. And that's what it is, and your physical strength and sweat, and most of the other arts don't even come close to what we do.
Okay, now I'd like to get into documenting the methods that you use, getting a bit more specific about that.
I'll let Brandr keep that because he's a lot better at that than I am.
Yeah.
So with this project, I actually tried to do as much of it in period fashion. So I used the coal forge and I used lump charcoal, not coal, not anthracite, for a number of reasons. In a lot of the Europe, trees were more abundant and easier to get than coal. And making a fire pit to create charcoal is very simple. So it also burns longer. You don't need as much air management for charcoal. I could get into that, but I'm not going to. So that's a whole other class. So using the coal forge for the first time, and this was the first time I learned on a coal forge at Pennsic 20 years ago, and I hadn't used one since. So using the coal forge for this particular amazingly difficult project may not have been the wisest thing to do because there was a very steep learning curve at the beginning. I burnt a lot of the metal, leaving it in too long because coal forges get very hot at the bottom. And if you leave it in too long, that metal turns to cake. So there's a learning curve. So that was part one. So part two was I didn't use any grinders or modern welding techniques for this. And for all the cutting, I actually used a cutting hammer, and that's in the video, to do the cutting of the bottom of the piece to create the the two spikes that come up.
Brandr,
And that was
Brandr,
interesting.
did you document some of the failures that you?
Yes, yeah, I did.
And-
Go down. Yes,
Go down.
keep going. So that's the first failure. That's the one that's too short. So that's the drawing of the bottom. That's so basically the dimensions of how much needed to be split from the bottom. And at the, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there's a nib that comes through the legs. That actually had to be forged by hand out of that 3/4 inch, the 3/4 inch plus the two, what resulted in 2 3/8 spikes down into a rivet, which goes through the legs and then gets peened over to hold the legs on. So that took almost a day for me to pound that down with a 4-pound hammer. Next, that's me. Go back. No. Right there. That's me using the splitting hammer to split the bottom of the central post to create the 2 spikes. So go down one more. So once I had it split, I put it in a vise and I used that same splitter to hit down, which is easier than on the anvil. But also you have to be careful because if you're not centered, it starts to go one way or the other and then they're not even. So you have to be very careful with splitting by hand like this. Next. So then we have, go up a little bit. This is, okay, so this is basically the splitting out and making the spikes. So go ahead. And what was interesting about this is because the piece was so long, drawing out those spikes on the anvil was really tough because I had to take the whole piece and put it up in the air to be able to roll the spike, and it kept hitting the overhead light in the shop. So I had to tie the overhead light up out of the way because I kept hitting it. So that was a bit of a pain. And then next. So that's the piece I was talking to you about. So this is now the folded over spikes and the 3/4 inch piece of steel, which needs to be hammered down into a rivet. And now this is the leg section, which was a nightmare. So the issue here is that the leg is actually it looks like 3 pieces, and the central part of the leg is it's a very thick piece of steel that's been rounded and then punched with a hole. And I could not figure out how they did it. So I tried a couple of things. I tried to take one piece and bend it, and then take another piece and forge weld that to the bend, but there wasn't nearly enough steel to create that central hub. So that was the first one, and that was a miserable failure. Attempt number 2, what I did. I tried forge welding the piece on top of the bend, thinking that when you hit it down, it will create more mass, but it didn't. It just flattened out. So attempt number 2 was a failure also. And I still have all of them in the shop. So then I spoke to a, what is this? So then I tried forge welding it back on itself, and then I was going to forge weld the other piece on top of that, but that didn't work either. So as we talked about, sometimes you have to go to somebody else for help. So I have a mentor, Master Danner, out in the wilds of Wisconsin, and he and I looked at the problem, and we realized that what needs to happen is, I don't know, I think the drawing is on the bottom of this. You take 2 pieces and weld them to the outside of 1 piece. You forge weld that whole thing together. That creates the central mass of what we need. And then you just bend the 2 top pieces out. And that's going to give you the legs, the mass that you'll be able to then punch through for the rivet. I never got to that because I ran out of time, but that was the solution we came up with, and I'm pretty sure that will work. And then, you know, once you've done that, then you round off the corners and create what is a circle at the bottom of the stand. So then we moved on to the arms, and this was the part that Ragnarr helped me with. And what's interesting about the arms is that this is 1 arm that is split into 3 separate pieces. 2 pieces that become a scroll, and the 1 piece that gets drawn out to hold the candle. And I measured that, I don't know, 20, maybe 30 times. And I was convinced that they had made that out of 3/8, that it was 3/8 square bar. So we started that process and we split it, and and there was nothing left after we split it. We tried a couple of times, and it really it was not good. So the conclusion that we came to was that it's actually 5/8 square, not 3/8. So 5/8 will be thick enough to split it and be able to have the width, because each of those scrolls is about a ½ an inch wide. So the 5/8 will give us enough mass to create the ½ inch scrolls and draw out the top for the point of the arm. Keep going. So I think at least one. Yeah, see there's a failure.
This is where it was too thin.
Yeah.
I didn't go for it.
So yeah. So I think I threw that across the room, right, Austin?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Just to make sure. And then I talked about the failures, which they really liked, and they were happy with my documentation and said this is, you know, a huge step forward for me, documentation wise. And also the way I write my documentation is very colloquial. I actually write my documentation like I speak. I don't try to be overly didactic. I just talk about it the way that I talk about it, and they actually liked that. They thought that it was that I came across as honest and informative. So this was a very big success for me.
Okay, Ragnarr, do you want to talk about how you made your wrangle and how you documented that part?
I mean, I don't know if I'm gonna have too much to add on here, especially because for whatever reason, this document doesn't have where I can't find the online version of where I documented everything, but like everything that Brandr just said there is what I'm trying to follow now. So I'll be honest, I don't have much to add here.
Oh, okay. So the key points seem to be documenting what works, but also how you learned and how you failed. And
They love the failures. They love seeing the failures.
Yeah, failure is always great to document, and take pictures of everything along the way.
Yeah, I actually videotaped most of this, as well as pictures.
Okay, and you also want to document the things where you deviated from how it was historically created, and the reasons
absolutely.
why.
Yeah, that's important.
And the materials that you used, including the tools that you used.
Yes, particularly if you're actually trying to use period tools or semi-period tools. Always document it, because that's all good stuff. The more you can give them, because remember, again, we're talking about mostly there are very few blacksmithing judges. We're hoping to fix that in the near future. I'm hoping to start getting out and judging more things, but so most of the people who are going to be judging your stuff have no context at all as to what goes into what you make. They're used to shiny, they're used to pretty, they're used to, if somebody's making a knife or a dagger, it's shiny, it's pretty. Metalwork is not shiny, it's usually not pretty. I mean, actually, it's pretty, but it's usually not shiny. And so they need to understand what went into making it, and any period pictures that you can present of the thing that you made helps for them to see, oh, that looks just like that. You want that. That's what you want. My plan when I finished this was I was going to bring it up to the cloister and take a picture of it right next to the original. They actually said that I could do that when it was done.
Nice.
So I am going to try to finish this thing.
Okay, well, thank you guys for walking us through your documentation. And as I said, these documents can be found on the Guild website, blacksmith.eastkingdom.org, under the paneling section. Thank you so much.